18 degrees.
LBC Travel, I'm Joanne Webb. Traffic's being held on the M3 northbound just after junction 3 at Lightwater, and that's because a van has broken down and it's very slow on the approach. In Barking, there are still restrictions on the London Road at the junction with the North Circular Road. On that roundabout, it's partially blocked because of an ongoing investigation. Also, problems continue on the A10 southbound, very busy to the M25 junction, and that's because of the restrictions on the junction roundabout. And on the trains, South Western Railway services aren't stopping southbound at Queenstown Road, and that's because of a track problem.
LBC.
When you're
Ferrari now 0345 6060 973 LBC. For Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:09 is the time. Just a couple of the many emails coming on in the events down at Bristol. Tony says, surely setting fire to police vehicles with police officers inside is attempted murder. Some of the video is very distressing, and a police officer who asks me to withhold his or her identity said what happened was disgusting last night. The anarchic far left attacked our police. The legislation, though, is also disgusting. The state ought not to have these powers. So thank you for your views. You're on the front line, as you say. Let's come to other matters. The front line against coronavirus and how technology will help identify mutations linked to certain variants. Here with details, Conservative MP and Care Minister Helen Whately. How will this new technology work and when will it come online? Good morning, Minister.
Good morning. Well, we're already trialling it with a plan to roll it out across all our PCR laboratories. So what this means is when you have a test, if you test positive, we will, within a matter of 48 hours, be able to identify whether that positive test is for a known variant of concern. And the advantage of that means that then we can take very rapid action to control and stop the spread of any variant of concern. So at the moment, in order to identify that you've got a particular mutation, we can do genomic sequencing, but that takes quite a few days. So this is a much quicker way to do this. And clearly with this virus, the quicker we can act, the quicker we can, more effectively, we can control it. So it's an important part of our controlling the virus.
OK, so that's one area where the government seeks to move quickly. It's fair to say you don't seem to move so quickly with regards to emergency powers. There's a suggestion they're going to be in place for an additional 6 months, and that's causing concern among some of your colleagues. Why do we need another 6 months of emergency powers, Minister?
I think you're talking about the Coronavirus Act,
yes.
Which we'll be voting on later this week. Well, the Coronavirus Act includes things like the legislation underpinning the furlough scheme and also the sick pay. That means that you can take sick pay from day one, and that can be applied if you are isolating for COVID.
Yeah, your colleagues are concerned about the authoritarian approach, though, of some of these restrictions. I'm sure you're aware of that. Why is that necessary?
So I'd say the restrictions actually are reviewed more frequently than that. They're reviewed every 35 days. But we know that with the roadmap that we will continue to need restrictions at least through till June the 21st. And I think as the Prime Minister has been quite clear, that's the soonest that we envisage that we can lift all the restrictions. But we are being driven by the data rather than the dates. So we will need to continue to look at the 4 tests that have been set out, including, in fact, variants of concern is a factor, hospitalisation, hospital pressures, the vaccination deployment, the vaccination.
Let's go back. Why is it necessary to have these extraordinary powers that you've enjoyed, your government's enjoyed for the best part of a year, which gives them powers to pass legislation? Why do we need to take that through to possibly October? That's my point.
Well, I should say, when you use the word enjoyed, I wouldn't say they are powers that the government enjoys having. They're powers that we've had to put in place in order to save people's lives from the virus and to control its spread. And as I just said, so the roadmap is a set of dates where we plan to lift restrictions, But
not this one. Not this one until October.
Review.
I don't understand why it's necessary to keep this until October. And many of your colleagues agree with me. You probably saw Esther McVeigh writing in one of the newspapers yesterday, the Sunday Express. You might have heard Steve Baker. These are your colleagues expressing concern. They can't see why. Neither can I. Minister, this is your way of explaining to my listeners why it is so vital to keep these emergency powers for another 6 months.
Well, as I said, actually, much of what's in the Coronavirus Act are things that we're using to support people through the pandemic, including, for example, the furlough scheme and sick pay, and the Chancellor's extended furlough scheme through to October, recognising...
You're not going to answer the question, are you? I've asked 3 times, Minister, why it's necessary to have these laws that you can bring in laws at record speed. You keep talking about furlough. Clearly you're not prepared to answer, are you?
Well, I've answered to why we
you think you've answered. I'm asking why you need emergency powers for an additional 6 months. You've mentioned furlough 3 times and the fight against coronavirus. You honestly think that's an adequate answer, do you, Minister? Because we'll just park it there, because I don't think it is. So do you want to end it there, or do you want to actually answer the question?
As far as I'm concerned, I've answered your question.
All right, we'll park it there. Let's talk a little bit then about, because I've tried. The European Union is seeking to block vaccine exports to Britain last night, forcing Downing Street into what's called a diplomatic push to secure that. Can you give us any of the latest on that, please, Minister?
Yeah, well, what I say on that is that we expect the EU to stick to their commitments. A commitment was made some time ago by Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the EU Commission, that the EU would not block the exports of vaccines when companies are fulfilling their contractual obligations. And it's really important that the European Union sticks to that. I think vaccine nationalism, vaccine protectionism, whatever you call it, doesn't do anybody any good. What's important is that around the world we maximise the production of the vaccine, because that's the best way that, both in the UK and in other countries, people can get vaccinated, and it's our best way out of the pandemic.
But what will we do if the European Commission seeks to block the export of these vaccines from this plant in the Netherlands? The Helix plant, I believe it's called.
No, what I envisage is that there will continue to be some robust conversations with the European Union about the importance of no such blockings happening. It's really important that companies are able to fulfil their contractual obligations, and we should all work together on this. I mean, we're having a
but if they don't, I totally agree. It would be marvellous, but sadly they're not all working together. So what would the government do if they don't work together, to use your words?
Well, I think I shouldn't be drawn into speculation about that. I'd say, the important message for us to say to the EU is they absolutely must enable these contractual obligations to be kept to. Meanwhile, we will full steam ahead with our vaccine deployment, making sure we've vaccinated those in cohorts 1 to 9 by April the 15th, because that's our best way of protecting people from the virus, stopping people being hospitalised and very sadly dying for it, and enabling life to get back to normal.
Lastly, can I get a word from you as a Government Minister, the events we witnessed in Bristol last night?
I think it's disgraceful, completely unacceptable behaviour. Not only the damage to police property, but even more seriously, the injuries to police officers. And my thoughts are with them and with their families as they recover. But just completely unacceptable, disgraceful behaviour.
What do you suppose caused it?
Well, what I understand is that it was a peaceful protest that unfortunately turned very ugly, and that it was a minority of people who chose to carry out this appalling behaviour. But I know that they were objecting to the police and crime bill, but somewhat paradoxically, the important thing is that there's a right to peaceful protest in this country, and that's what we want to continue to see.
Yes, lastly, you don't think it's the strength of feeling. Of course, nothing justifies an assault on police officers or indeed an attack on police property, but you don't think it speaks to the strength of feeling that some people sense that they're having their freedoms taken away?
Well, actually, I'd stick with what you absolutely said, is nothing justifies an assault on police officers. And in fact, part of the police and crime bill is to increase the sentence for people who do assault an emergency worker. That's really important. And may it send out a message that this is just not acceptable behaviour.
All right. Grateful for your time. Thank you, Conservative MP and Health Minister, Care Minister Helen Whately, appearing here on LBC, where 8 o'clock. Remember, Keir Starmer here taking your calls later in the show, but 8 o'clock news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the Prime Minister is facing a growing Tory rebellion over plans to extend emergency COVID laws in England for another 6